in this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So let's join with the invocatory prayers, joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So welcome back to our concluding session. So we will continue our discussions of the 18th chapter, the Moksha Yoga. So in the first session, in yesterday's session, we saw Krishna beginning with explaining the concept of what is liberation, what is renunciation, right? So this is Moksha Yoga. Remember, we discussed what moksha was, the yoga of liberation, the yoga of perfection of liberation. So this, we saw yesterday what was the real understanding of renunciation. And we saw essentially Krishna was trying to re-emphasize to Arjuna that the concept of how to be of this world, how to belong to this world and still not get affected by the worldliness, which means where you are still engaging in action, but in a way that is not binding you to this world. And therefore, to do that, we need to understand the building blocks of action. And that was the motivation and constitution we saw yesterday. In today's chapter, or in this section, starting today, we're going to see the intentions part, right? And that is what shapes us. What we call as our nature is effectively the gunas shaping us. Right, all our past impressions, they shape us. What we are today is basically the cumulative effect of all our past impressions, and that conglomerate effect, the cumulative effect of all of that is what that creates my present inclinations. And after having understood the constitution and motivation, Krishna is now going to talk about the theme of our inclinations. So text number 41 to 48, right? So we are going to talk about the concept of channelizing our swabhavas, channelizing swabhava or our nature into our swadharma. Swadharma here is our prescribed duty. Right? So let's write that down. Swabhava is our nature and Swadharma is our prescribed duty. Right? So this is how Krishna now, he begins that based on this Swabhava, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Visham, Shudranam cha Parantapa, Karmani, Pravibhaktani Swabhava Prabhavair Gunai. Because of the Prabhava, because of the influence of the modes of material nature. So basically the cycle that we are going to see now is very, very profound. the gunas living in this material world, we are all affected by the various modes of material nature, and that is something we cannot deny, and something that we cannot immediately overcome. So you have to acknowledge that here I am, the composite effect of all the gunas, a very unique percentage combination of sattva, rajas and tamas. That is who I am. So my gunas from the past and present, they define my nature or my swabhava, right? But there is nothing wrong in a particular combination of gunas, right? It is, so understand that the gunas, if not understood properly, can be like a curse, but if understood properly, can be like a wonderful opportunity. So this swabhava, when transformed into an opportunity, when engaged into a particular prescribed duty as given in the Vedas, it becomes into your swadharma. And as we understand our swadharma and act according to the right constituents of action, right motivation, what we discussed in the previous section. Basically, if our knowledge, knower, object of knowledge, or the happiness, the determination, all the 6 factors that we discussed, if we engage our swadharma, whichever guna it may be born out of, but if we engage our swadharma in a mode of goodness of the previous 2 stages, right, of our, then that swadharma will elevate our consciousness. It will help us realize our swarupa, or our eternal constitutional position, right, as a soul in its very unique constitution. So this is the whole progression that Krishna is going to talk about now, right? So this is a very important, a very powerful theme. Remember again, as we discussed yesterday, how the Gita philosophy is a very socially engaging philosophy. So we don't have to deny the kind of combination of gunas, the kind of natures that we have. If you remember, we briefly touched upon this theme in the 4th chapter when Krishna says Chaturvarna Maya Shishtam, and we also spoke about that a little more in detail in the 16th chapter, how there are these different varnas and ashramas. So Krishna is going to talk about these different varnas or social engagements. So essentially, if you see, we are dealing with 3 gunas here, right? So we have the mode of goodness, sattva. Then we have rajas, mode of passion, and there is tamas. And each of these, they create a wonderful spectrum, right? So what does this do? So if somebody has their gunas and swabhava predominant in the mode of goodness, that mode is called as the Shudra, right? So if you remember, we discussed the nature of the Shudra is one who always likes to be in that status quo, right? And when such people are best when they work under some guidance, right? And one of their greatest qualities is their ability to serve. Service is one of their very wonderful virtues if channelized properly, right? Then somewhere in between this combination of rajas and tamas was the guna of Vaishya, and little between rajas and sattva is that of a kshatriya. Little closer to sattva was a brahmana, and somebody who's only situated like pure unalloyed goodness, right? Such a person is a liberated soul. It is called Shuddha Sattva. So this stage we are not really worried about. We are basically talking about these 4 varnas of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, right? So the gunas, their combination, right? So I'm going to jump a few verses, right? where Krishna is going to say at the end of this section, in fact, text number 48, Krishna says, just like how every endeavor is covered by some fault, like how fire is covered by smoke. Right? So even the most cleanest of the cleanest fires will have some level of smoke. Right? Even some of you might have say, like an LPG in India, they use natural gas, right, as a source of cooking and for producing heat in the kitchen. So even when the LPG gas, when it is burning, you may see there is only transparent blue flame, very clean fire, but actually there is some carbon dioxide being released. So there is some smoke, right? Compared to say firewood, where the smoke is very, very clear and evident, right? But even the most cleanest fire still has some level of smoke. So likewise, every endeavor, every work has some tinge of these gunas, and they create these faults. Therefore, one should not give up one's work which is born out of one's nature, right? Even if such work is full of fault. So the point Krishna is trying to make here is that at the level of my inclination, my inclinations have been defined based on my past. But I have the power, I have the ability to train myself. I may not be able to change my nature so drastically, but given my nature, I can work on the motivation and the constitution of work, and I can try to put that in mode of goodness. If I personally may not be in mode of goodness, I may be in the combination of one of these gunas, but by adjusting my motivation and constitution of work in mode of goodness, I can still attain perfection according to my nature. In fact, when a person is more in tune with their nature, it becomes very easy for them to channelize their motivations and constitutions of work in mode of goodness. That way, a person is still engaging and acting in this world, but not getting affected, because internally they are situated in the mode of goodness. Externally, because of their psychophysical nature, they may be operating under one of the gunas, but that is not a shortcoming. This is a very important principle, because the whole Vedic system or the Vedic way of organizing a society, it is not that somebody is higher or somebody is lower. This is unfortunately a big misconception that people carry. In fact, the beauty of Vedic culture was every varna's activities was centered around a particular spiritual center, a pivot, a spiritual pivot, usually, direct temple related activities. Right? In fact, whenever the Lord's procession has to leave, so you will see every varna, the Brahmanas, they have their role of reciting the mantras. The Kshatriya has their own role of being like in the part of the procession. The Vaishyas have the role of facilitating the whole aspect. The Shudras have a role of carrying the torch and playing the musical instruments. If any one of these varnas do not turn up, the entire event cannot take place. So you see how the Vedic culture was so beautiful. Every varna was made to feel special because of their very unique contribution of service to the Lord. And while engaging their guna in service of the Lord, they would act in that mode of goodness. Their motivation and constitutions would be anchored in the mode of goodness. So Krishna therefore is saying that you don't have to change your activity per se. Be honest to your activity, be honest to your nature, be true to your nature, but work on the motivation and constitution of your action, like that. So, but I need to identify my nature. I need to know what are the activities of the Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, what are the prescribed duties, right? So for that, Krishna now begins this section. So where he says, in text number 42, he says, Samo dama tapas shaucham Shantir arjamam evacha jnana vijnana astikyam brahma karma swabhavajam. So kshama, dama. So such a brahmana, the nature of such a brahmana is peaceful. Dama, self-control. austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, etc. Wisdom, knowledge, wisdom, and religiousness. These are the natural qualities of a Brahmana, right? So we elaborated more in chapter number 16. So for details, please refer back to that particular class, right? Regarding the Kshatriya here, specifically Krishna says, Shauryam tejo diti daksham yuddhe cha apalayanam danam ishvara bhavascha kshatram karma swabhavajam. So these are the very beautiful characteristics of a Brahmana. Heroism of a Kshatriya, sorry. Heroism, Shauryam, Teja, power, determination, resourcefulness. You know, a Kshatriya never says no. Somehow they will figure out how to get things done. Resourcefulness, courage in battle, generosity, leadership. Right? It's very important that with all this power, they also have generosity. And therefore, they become natural leaders. Leadership is one of the important traits of a Kshatriya. Right? So they inspire that leadership. They command, naturally command. They don't demand that leadership, but through their actions, they inspire that sense of respect and trust among their followers. That is the nature of a Kshatriya. Right? So it's very interesting to note that when it comes to describing the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, Krishna not only talks about their activities, like for a Brahmana, Krishna says knowledge, wisdom, religiousness. So obviously that is their activity. They need to be busy acquiring knowledge, spreading religious activities and so on. But along with that, Krishna also talks about certain qualities that one needs, like peacefulness, self-control, austerity, purity, so on. Likewise for Kshatriya also, heroism is a quality. Determination, resourcefulness, generosity, these are certain qualities also. So along with the activity, there is a strong emphasis on quality. This is also a very important principle, because today, merely people who still try to follow the system of these varnas, they only look at it in a very superficial way just by identifying those activities or linking those activities. But there is activity and quality, which is very important, especially for the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. Whereas for Vaishyas, Krishna specifically talks about just the activities. So what is the activity of a Vaishya? Krishi, Goraksha, Vanijyam. So Krishi means farming. Goraksha means cow protection. Right? So with cow, it includes all the animals. And Vanijya. Vanijya means business. So these are the natural qualities of activities of a Vaishya. And Shudra is Paricharyatmakam karma. So for Shudra, there is labor and service to others. So working under somebody's guidance and rendering service. So if you see that, these are the natural prescribed duties given to these four varnas, right? And the principle is that how by following his qualities of work, every person can become perfect, right? Then Krishna says, now here, how this is to be done? By worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who's all pervading, a person can attain perfection through performing his own work. And then Krishna repeats a verse which Krishna repeated in the originally mentioned in the 3rd chapter. Shreyan swadharmo viguna paradharmat swa anushtitat swabhava nityam karma kurvan na apnoti kilbisham. It is better to engage in one's occupation even though one may perform it imperfectly than to accept another's occupation, perform it perfectly. Duties prescribed according to one's nature are never affected by sinful reaction. This is a very, very important verse, because it is repeating twice. So there has to be something important here. So what is the principle here? That one has to follow one's prescribed duties in the spirit of devotion. And when does that, that leads to the perfection of life. And then Krishna also says that, even if there are any faults, even if there are any shortcomings, right? Even if there is imperfections and faults, right? Many times when you think of your work, when we think of life, when we think of our duties, we think that we have to be perfect in it, right? There should be no flaws, absolutely perfect. But the Vedic perspective of work is not about success in your work, the external success in your work, right? In fact, when there are a lot of imperfection and faults, it is very natural that one may go through certain frustrations. But when one is rooted in the proper understanding, especially when one acts in the mode of goodness, such frustrations will lead to purification of the heart, which is a real success of work. Success of work is not just in the external achievement of reaching the end goal of that work, but the success of work is purification of heart. So therefore, if there are some faults in our activities, it is all the more better. Rather than becoming successful and becoming proud, right? Achieving the end goal and becoming proud, better sometimes the people go through certain failures in life, right? Because many of us, we heard this statement, failures are stepping stone to success. But not every failure leads to success. Failure, when seen with the right attitude, with the right consciousness, that leads to success. And that is that attitude when our motivation and the constitution of our work is situated in mode of goodness, any activity that we take up to according to our prescribed duties, success or failure, it is going to lead to purification of heart. And therefore, Krishna is telling Arjuna, don't worry, Arjuna. Even if you succeed in this war, or even if you fail in this war, because you are engaging in your prescribed duties, but do it with a sense of detachment. Do it as a sense of offering in the spirit of devotion. That itself is success for you. Don't worry about whether you won the war or you lost the war, right? But as long as you're acting in that spirit of devotion, engaging in mode of goodness, being true to your nature, when all these things are there, that leads to purification of heart. That is a real success of any kind of endeavor, right? So therefore, this is a very important principle. Many times the work we equate with results, right? This is such a wrong understanding, right? If you actually equate work with purification of heart, purification of our existence, that is a real understanding. So therefore, the whole concept of success failure is such a non-existent concept, right? And that is why people in the Vedic culture were relatively more peaceful, because their focus was more on giving their 100%, not in how much they can enjoy back, right? So this is the whole mindset change we have to bring if we truly want to be in line with the mood of the Bhagavad Gita. So then, now in the next 3 sections, Krishna is going to give something very, very deep and profound, right? So this is also a very powerful section coming up, the next section. So literally from text number 49, going all the way till 66, in which Krishna is now going to summarize that because you have to work in that spirit of devotion, right? So remember, so far what we understood is, 1, according to my inclination, which is my swabhava, based on the gunas and my nature, I engage in certain prescribed duty. Step number 1. Step number 2, even though my gunas, my swabhava may be in the lower modes or higher modes, that doesn't matter. But when it comes to my motivation and constitution of work, that should be in the mode of goodness, right? So the how part is very clear. What part? Let's actually write this down. This is important. So what is clear so far for us is the what to do is defined by my swabhava, my prescribed duties. The how to do part is clear based on the motivation and constitution. Right? This is something that we saw in the previous section from text number 18 to 40 of this chapter. Right? From 18 to 40, we saw this. Then the Swabhava part we saw from 41 to 48. Now, the why to do aspect, which is working in the spirit of devotion. This is something that will now be elaborated from text number 41 all the way across 49, sorry, all the way across till text number 66, right? And Krishna is going to go through a 3-level understanding of this concept. So let's see that. So the first level he's going to talk about from text number 49 through 55. He calls this as the confidential path. Right? So what is this confidential path? Let's read that. Text 49. One who is self-controlled and unattached and who disregards all material enjoyment can obtain by practice of renunciation, by practice of sannyasa, the highest perfection of freedom from reaction. So the first step is where such a person, such a pure person, this is not a process for everyone, but rather for a very for a person who has gone through a lot of purification, because usually when they go through this whole process of acting according to their swabhava, when the what and how are put together, right? And as through life experiences, they come to a certain stage where now they have developed that kind of purity because of the nature of their work. And now at that particular stage, such a jnani becomes internally so purified that one is ready to take sannyasa, right? Or enter into the renounced order of life. And such a person attains the perfected stage of freedom from reaction, right? So if you remember, in chapter number 6 also we spoke about this. There's a yoga rudha and a yoga arurukshu and yoga arudha. So the arurukshu, we discuss work is said to be the means of liberation, whereas for arurukshu we said arudha, we said cessation of work is said to be the means of success. So that person who, having gone through the purification, is now genuinely ready to renounce the world, not prematurely, not, remember we discussed this, the renunciation in 3 modes also is something Krishna discussed in the beginning of this chapter. So those such jnanis, they take up this path of sannyasa, right? And then what happens? Learn from me now, Arjuna. One who has achieved this perfection can attain to the supreme perfectional stage called as Brahman, the stage of highest knowledge, right? And then he discussed, what does such a person do? Being such a jnani who has now taken this renunciation, the order of renunciation, sannyasa, being purified by his intelligence and controlling the mind with determination, gives up the objects of sense gratification, being freed from attachment and hatred. One who lives in a secluded place, who eats little, who controls his body, mind, and power of speech, who's always in trance and who's detached, free from false ego, false strength, false pride, lust, anger, and acceptance of material things, free from false proprietorship, and peaceful. Such a person is certainly elevated to the position of self-realization. And such a person, he attains that stage called as Brahma Bhuta. Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma na shochati na kankshati samaha sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labhate param. So such a person who's attains Brahma Bhuta stage means Brahma, if you remember, we explained this word in the 4th chapter, a transcendental state beyond matter. So Brahma Bhuta means one who's firmly situated in that stage of transcendence, at once realizes one's qualitative nature as I am also that spirit, I am also that Brahman, right? And such a person, he na shochati na kankshati, he neither laments nor he desires, right? Samah sarveshu bhuteshu, he is completely rooted in being equipoised. And in such a state, mad bhakti labhate param. From the Brahmabhuta stage, he attains mad bhakti. Mad means here, Krishna says, devotion unto Krishna, right? Mad bhakti here means devotion unto Krishna, right? So like that. So this is, and he says, such a person, one can understand me, bhaktya mam abhijanati, yavan yasyasvi tatvatah, tato mam tatvato gyatva, vishate tat anantaram. Only through such devotional service one can understand Krishna. So if we actually, okay, let's actually discuss the next words also, and I'll give you a more easier way of remembering these concepts. So then from text number 56 through 63, Krishna talks about the more confidential path. Guhya, Guhyatara, Guhyatama. So he uses those words. Guhya means secret, confidential. Guhyatara means more confidential. Guhyatama means most confidential. So what is this more confidential path? So here he says, though engaged in all kinds of activities, my pure devotees under my protection reaches the eternal and imperishable abode by my grace. Right? So such a person, so here is another person who is a devotee of Krishna, who's devotionally inclined to Krishna, right? And such a person is acting under the Lord's protection, and because such a person is acting under the Lord's protection, what does he do? Chetasa sarva karmani mai sannyasa matparaha buddhi yogam upashritra mat chitta satatam bhava. So such a person uses the buddhi yoga. So what the buddhi yoga that we discussed. So this more confidential path is a buddhi yoga path. So what we discussed throughout this course, that integrated yoga path, right? So what does such a person do? Because he's taking shelter of the Lord. Machitta sarva durgani mat prasada tarishyasi atachetatvam anahankara na shoshashi vinakshasi. So if you become conscious of me, you will pass over all these obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. But if you act under the influence of that ahankara, right, then you will be lost. So a very important principle is the buddhi, under the buddhi yoga principle. Remember, how do you define this buddhi yoga? Karma on the platform of jnana with the protection of the Lord in the form of bhakti. Because such a buddhi yogi may not be so pure as the sannyasi that we spoke about in those are the pure sannyasi in the previous path. Such a person is still, struggling with their mind and senses. But because they are acting under the protection of the Lord, according to the principle of buddhi yoga, therefore they are given Lord's protection. Even such a person can attain to that perfected stage, right? But the important principle is, what does it mean to act under the Lord's protection? Not letting one's ego take over, not thinking that I am the doer, I am the master, I am the controller, I am the enjoyer. Ultimately, I am going to enjoy the spoils of this war. That sense of I-ness, minus, me and mine, that understanding, one has to stay away from them, right? So such a person, then how is the Lord protecting him? Remember how in the 10th chapter also we discussed this. How does the dadami buddhi yogantam, how does it happen? Because Krishna is present as Paramatma in the heart of every living entity. So therefore, Krishna personally intervenes to such a person who has genuinely taken shelter of this Buddhi Yoga process. And that is what Krishna is going to talk about. Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam Hriddeshe Arjuna Tishtati Brahmayam Sarva Bhutani Yantra Rudhani Mayaya. The Supreme Lord, Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, Sarva Bhutani Hriddeshe, in the region of the heart, O Arjuna, the Lord is present, right? The Super Soul is present. And this body is just like a yantra. It's like an instrument, like a vehicle, right? So therefore, just tameva sharanam gacha sarva bhavena bharata tat prasadat param shantim sthanam prapyasi shashvatam. Just surrender unto that Paramatma, right? Just depend on the protection of that Paramatma and acting according to the regulations given in the Buddhi Yoga, right? Then one can attain to the Lord's abode, like that. So here the important principle is that the Lord's protection is the key, and one should not act under the influence of ego, should not act under the influence of false ego, right? So these two parts, confidential, more confidential, if you want to put them together in a process flow, right? So what happens in the beginning? In the beginning, it all begins with every person, every individual, whether one taking the confidential path or most confidential path, one begins with one's prescribed duties. That is the common denominator for all of them, right? And what are these prescribed duties? Prescribed duties here means working according to one's nature, right? So that basically is the Karma Yoga part that we studied, the Yajna of Karma Yoga that we discussed in the 3rd chapter, right? Now, in the course of performing one's Karma Yoga, gradually one experiences purification, and because of which one comes to a state of higher understanding. And that is a stage where, by the power of Jnana Yoga, one is now ready to renounce this world, and such a person, after having renounced this world, attains to that state of Brahman, to the process of intellectual conviction. Remember, we discussed this in the 7th chapter, where one is remembering Krishna through intellectual conviction. So this is the Jnana Mishra Bhakti, or where one is trying to connect to that Brahman, and from that Brahman, Mad Bhaktim Labhate Param. Then from here, one develops bhakti, and attains to the absolute truth, or Krishna. Right? So that is a flow that the Jnani, remember what we discussed in the beginning of 2nd chapter, and here specifically we are talking about even the person whom we discussed in the 7th chapter, and so on, right? So basically the path of Jnana, where one is genuinely gone through purification, is now detached from this world, such a person takes to that path, right? However, when one is still continuing to work one's prescribed duties, but now such a person is acting under the protection of the Lord. Such a person now develops a deeper vision and one now takes up to this dhyana, right? And by that, through the process of meditative absorption, one realizes the Paramatma, Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hriddeshe Arjuna Tishtati. So he realizes the Paramatma through the process of meditative absorption, what we saw in the 8th chapter. And from the Paramatma understanding, one again develops bhakti and reaches Krishna. Right? So that is the more classical, the Buddhi Yoga understanding, where karma, jnana, then dhyana. So this is more of a very progressive devotional path, right? Where after having performed karma, then jnana, then dhyana, then finally one attains to the Paramatma understanding, and then one sees, oh, that Paramatma is indeed Krishna, right? And that is how one connects to the Lord, right? But then, after giving these two paths, which is what we discussed so far in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Especially the more conventional path has been very much elaborated throughout the Bhagavad Gita. But we also saw that there was this path of exclusive devotion. And that is something Krishna is going to talk about from text number 64 to 66. Krishna is now going to present the most confidential path. What is most confident path? Krishna says, oh Arjuna, because you are my very dear friend, I am speaking this to you, my highest instruction, my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all, right? Sarva guhyatamam, guhyatamam, the highest, most confidential knowledge. Hear this from me, for it is for your benefit, right? So what is Krishna saying here? He's now going to talk about a very direct path, where while you are performing your prescribed duties, if you can always think of Krishna and work in that devotional, in loving devotion, what we studied in 9th and 10th chapters, right? And that loving devotion manifesting in the form of surrender to the Lord, then one directly realizes the Bhagavan. And that Bhagavan is none other than Krishna himself. Again, the connection of bhakti comes, right? So this is a more direct path, where one is trying to connect to Krishna through that exclusive devotion. So what is that exclusive devotion? In text number 65, Krishna is going to repeat the verse that we already, this is the second time again this verse is coming. Once we saw in the ending of 9th chapter. What is it? Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mam eveshashi satyam te pratijani priyosime. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homages unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my best friend. So it talks about the process of exclusive devotion, Ananya Bhakti. Something that Krishna has been indirectly speaking in every chapter. We had a long discussion if you remember, when we discussed the 10th chapter, we discussed how throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna though has been giving a general method. As a Vedic scholar, he is giving the general path, but at the same time, as a friend and well-wisher of Arjuna, he is also giving Arjuna a personal recommendation. So there's a general explanation and there's a personal recommendation, right? So most of this that you see here, the confidential path and the more confidential path, these are the general descriptions of spirituality that Krishna is giving, right? But the most confidential path is a personal recommendation Krishna is giving Arjuna because he is his friend and well-wisher. And that is why this understanding of Gita is extremely rare. the understanding of Gita, of where he's talking about exclusive devotion, is very rare. To see that exclusive devotion every chapter of Bhagavad Gita is even more rare. And to see that exclusive devotion in every verse of Bhagavad Gita is, I will say, it is practically impossible. It is rarest of the rare. And many times, unfortunately, those who not understand this, they are very critical of the purpose that Srila Prabhupada writes to Bhagavad Gita as it is, where Srila Prabhupada understanding the heart of Krishna, because that Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is explanation is for those who want to be the followers of Arjuna, those who want to surrender to Krishna or approach Krishna with the path of exclusive devotion. And therefore, in every verse of the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada brings out this mood of this most confidential path of exclusive devotion, the rarest of the rarest of the rare paths. And that is what makes Srila Prabhupada's explanation so very unique, right? Because ultimately, one has to see what is the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. The purpose of Bhagavad Gita is not to get some general information about the Vedic science. We don't study Bhagavad Gita to become Vedic scholars, right? We study Bhagavad Gita to save ourselves first, to deliver ourselves and perfect our life, right? That is a primary purpose. And what more effective path than this most confidential path of the Bhagavad Gita, which Krishna is giving as a personal recommendation throughout to Arjuna, So this is the secret that many times people fail to understand. It is just like sometimes, if perhaps we did it in our childhood, on our birthdays, we go around distributing chocolates in our school, right? And we have this one big bag of chocolates and, the simple chocolates, whatever, and you pass it around, 2 chocolates to every student, you go around and give them. But in your bag, there is a big bar of candy, which you brought exclusively for your best friend. And secretly, while nobody is looking, externally you are distributing the simpler chocolate to all your friends, but while nobody is looking, very secretly you bring out that big bar of candy and give it to your best friend. Literally, that is what Krishna is doing in the Bhagavad Gita. So while he's talking about this jnana, karma, dhyana, he's giving us some general description, the Vedic methods, right? Including even Buddhi Yoga for that matter is also a Vedic method. But Krishna is also holding a big bar of candy, especially for Arjuna. And the beauty of the Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding of the Bhagavad Gita, as beautifully brought out by Srila Prabhupada, is we want that candy. We don't want to settle for that simple chocolate. The simple chocolate will also deliver us, right? So even when you read some other commentaries, they have their own utility in their own sense, right? But if you want to understand the spirit of this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, as brought out by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he wanted all of us to understand this most confidential path. And what is that most confidential path? In text number 66, Krishna talks about that. 1866, which is perhaps the most, the most important. In fact, this is one verse. If you want to understand Krishna's heart from the Bhagavad Gita, it doesn't get more louder than this verse. In this verse, Krishna, he says, forget all the rules, all these principles, all these philosophy classes I have given so far. Arjuna, just surrender unto me. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. Abandon all varieties of this dharma, whatever I have told you so far, Arjuna. If you're finding it complicated, forget it. Mam ekam sharanam vraja. Just surrender unto me, Arjuna. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo. You are worried about sin. You are worried about the war. All the while throughout the Bhagavad Gita, right in the first chapter, you've been talking about sin, 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 sin. And I gave you this entire confidential path and more confidential path to help you navigate through this world without getting affected. I gave you all this complicated buddhi yoga, karma on the platform of jnana, with the mood intention of bhakti. I gave you all these methods of avoiding sin and how to be off the world and off the world. If you didn't understand any of that, don't worry. Just surrender unto me. I will take care of you. Mamekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyamiti ma suchaha. Do not worry, Arjuna. This is the grand crescendo verse. If you know how operas work, when in the point which is the most dramatic point in an opera on the stage, there's a big loud music and the singers are in their highest pitch. All the chorus are singing together in their highest pitch. So this verse of the Bhagavad Gita is that grand crescendo verse where Krishna's call for surrender unto me. This is the essence of the most confidential secret of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Krishna is making it very direct and explicit. All along, going back to our birthday boy example, all along what has been happening is very secretly he has been breaking it into small pieces and giving it to his best friend. But in this particular point, Krishna could no more contain himself, because Krishna was remembering all his pure devotees in his mind and is thinking, Arjuna, you are also my pure devotee. I cannot see you suffer like this. I will protect you personally. Just surrender unto me. Right? Do not worry. Ma sucha. So this is the mood. This is the heart of Bhagavad Gita. Right? And many times, many academicians, many scholars, even certain spiritualists who do not understand this theme, they focus unnecessarily, maybe not unnecessarily, but they overemphasize unnecessarily on these other aspects, forgetting what is the crux of Bhagavad Gita, what is in the heart of Bhagavad Gita, of the speaker of Bhagavad Gita. If you remember on the first week itself, first class I mentioned, do not get into all these complications. Ultimately, Bhagavad Gita, it's a song. It's a love song which God is singing for us, which Krishna is singing for us, right? So in a song, you're not interested in the meter, in the words, in the tune. What you're interested is in the bhava, in what are the feelings behind that song, right? So if the entire Bhagavad Gita is like the very beautiful melody, it has very beautiful swings in the melody and the tune and the background music and the beautiful lyrics and the composition, the ragam, talam and pallavi and all these things which are there. The entire Bhagavad Gita is like that. But if you want to know the bhava, if you want to know the heart of Bhagavad Gita, it is this verse, 1866. Sarva dharman parityaja mam ekam sharanam vraja. Right? And that is being brought out so beautifully by the teachings of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his primary student, Srila Rupa Goswami. And of course, and in the line of Srila Rupa Goswami and Sri Raghunath Das Goswami, Srila Prabhupada, when he presents how every verse of the Bhagavad Gita is connected to exclusive devotion, it is not exaggeration, it is not forced interpretation, but rather it is an explanation in compassion. Because who's going to last till the 18th chapter? Who's going to read till the end of the book and steer through all this complication and come to this understanding? Can you imagine? We had to wait for practically 3 months now to come to the heart of Bhagavad Gita, right? And I remember the first day of the course, we had some, 80 odd students. And now we have around 18 students, right? So clearly, you'll be able to appreciate the Bhaktivedanta purports better if you understand this. This is what is Kali Yuga about. You have to give the essence upfront. And there is no way you can miss that essence. Any chapter, any verse, any paragraph you read, you are going to get that secret essence in Srila Prabhupada's purports, right? And that because he's presenting the heart of the Bhagavad Gita of Krishna. Only a true lover of Krishna can understand the heart of Krishna and bring that out very prominently. That is the speciality of great acharyas who are lovers of Krishna and who want to bring out what is within the heart of my master, heart of my Lord. And that is this process of surrender. Now, some of you at this point may be thinking, what is surrender then? Does it mean, do I just give up all my activities and say, oh, Krishna, you take care? Is that what surrender means? No. Surrender is not surrendering your action. What are we surrendering? We are surrendering our false ego. We are surrendering all these egoistic conceptions that we carry, that I am the doer, I am the master. But reinstate ourselves in our original constitutional position that I am the servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord. Right? And that, when rooted in that identity, right, then surrender takes a very, very beautiful understanding. So Srila Prabhupada very nicely explains what this surrender means. So there are the 6 limbs of surrender. So what exactly does surrender mean? Anukulyasya sankalpa, accepting the favorable. Pratikulasya varjanam, rejecting the unfavorable. Rakshayashyati vishwaso, firm faith in Krishna's protection. Firm faith in Krishna's protection. Then not worrying about keeping one's, or not worrying about one's maintenance. Not worrying about one's personal maintenance. Right? Then full dependence on Krishna, Atma Nivedana. And Karpanya, humility. These are the 6 progressive limbs of surrender, right? So many times when we use the word surrender, we may directly identify with step number 5 and 6, full dependence on Krishna and humility and completely surrendering, completely depending on Krishna. Oh, Krishna, I'm yours, just take care. But you may not feel that, right? So this is the beauty of the Gaudiya Vaishnava teachings. What the Gaudiya Vaishnava Siddhanta talks about is that surrender is both a stage and a process. When you look at surrender as a stage, we are talking about the previous 2 paths, the confidential and the more confidential paths, where after going through karma and jnana and dhyana, so as part of karma, one performs one's varnashram dharma, the prescribed duties properly, and then based on the purification of the varnashram dharma, one swabhava, one is purely inclining them, aligning them, and then once one realizes one's swarupa as a spirit soul, and then one surrenders brahmabhuta prasannatma, one attains the state of Brahman, or one Ishvara sarvabhutanam, by working under the protection of Lord, by following the Buddhi Yoga process, one connects to the Ishvara Paramatma understanding, and from there one realizes Krishna. So there, surrender is a stage. It's a very advanced stage where all the other yoga systems culminate. Bhakti, as that exclusive surrender, is a stage which is a culmination of karma, jnana, dhyana, ashtanga, and finally the bhakti or the surrender process, stage. Right? That is what we understood prominently in the Bhagavad Gita. But here, the specialty of this section, of specifically this verse, is how surrender can also be a process. Right? So what is that process of surrender that Krishna is talking about? In this process of surrender, you begin by accepting things which are favorable for Krishna. So this is a stage where one can act even right from the beginning, even though one is not purified fully, one can still learn to act at this process, right? So this is the process of that sadhana bhakti which our acharyas have given us. So this sadhana bhakti is actually non-different from the process of surrender. However, one should not be immature into thinking of, here we are following that full dependence of Krishna, so let me just stop acting. No, even the sadhana bhakti stage, one is still acting, but acting in a way which are favorable for one's for Krishna, and rejecting things that are unfavorable. That is why Sri Rupa Goswami, when he defined this process of sadhana bhakti or bhakti in general, he talks about anyabhilashita shunyam, jnana karmadi anavritam, anukulena Krishna anushilanam. So it has to be anukula. Anukula means it has to be favorable for Krishna, and it is free from anyabhilasha, no other unnecessary anyabhilashita, no other unnecessary desires, which means there is still engagement with this world. It is not that such a person gives up everything saying, Krishna, you take care. One is still working very hard, but not for, just for attaining some purification or do because I have to do my prescribed duty, therefore I have to follow my varnashram dharma, therefore I do this. No, they externally they are still engaging in their prescribed duties, but for the pleasure of Krishna. They are still meditating, but for the pleasure of Krishna. They are reading scriptures, but for the pleasure of Krishna, right? And that is this process of sadhana bhakti. So then so then one gradually progresses, so accepting favorable, rejecting the unfavorable, right? Then one develops firm faith in Krishna's protection. One has to earn their right to that stage. Then once you have firm faith in Krishna's protection, then you can genuinely not worry about personal maintenance. You cannot prematurely imitate that stage. Then one can fully depend on Krishna, because at that particular stage, Krishna's interventions are visible to such a devotee. Krishna is constantly intervening in everyone's life, but right now we are not able to perceive it because of our lack of full surrender. So this is the beauty of that sadhana bhakti process, where surrender itself has been converted into a process. And that is the wealth that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come. Anarpita charinchirat. So such a mercy has never been ever given before. Anarpita karunaya avatirita karo. Samarpayatim unnata ujwalarsa swabhaktim shriyam. Hare purat sundari. So that, that swabhakti, the devotion unto himself, because Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is none other than Krishna himself. While in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna just said, okay, surrender unto me. But Krishna, you didn't speak about that exclusively throughout the Bhagavad Gita. You only distributed that chocolate secretly to your friend Arjuna. You didn't very explicitly highlight that. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna coming back in the mood of a devotee to personally teach this process of surrender. And that epitome of that process of surrender, as exemplified with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is this loud Sankirtan, chanting of the holy names of Krishna, chanting of this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, especially in a group, congregational chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in the mood of the Brajavasis, especially the gopis of Vrindavan, where that helpless cries that the Brajavasis, in that stage of complete utter love for Krishna and dependence on Krishna, surrender unto Krishna, when Indra started attacking the Brajavasis, sending the Samvartaka clouds, which are used at time of cosmic annihilation, what did the Brajavasis do? What did the residents of Vrindavan do? They just surrendered to Krishna. Krishna, you are our only shelter, right? When Draupadi was being insulted, and when she tried everything, she tried approaching her husbands, she tried approaching the elders in the family. At one point she used her own strength, but at that point she understood, at that stage, this is a very, very advanced stage what she is acting at. She just surrenders. She raises her arms and says, Krishna, you are Ohe Govinda, right? And That's when Krishna, he personally intervened and manifested his protection. So that process of surrender, of just raising your hands and chanting out the names of Krishna and practicing the process of surrender through congregational chanting of the holy names, is the special process that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given, right? And that is why he emphasizes so much that for that mood to develop, it is very important that we start cultivating humility right from the beginning. Trinadhapi suni chena. When we are chanting that holy names of the Lord, it has to be, what is the mood of the chanting? We should be think of ourselves as more humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, right? You throw the stones at the tree and it gives you mangoes. That is a level of tolerance a tree has. Amanina manadena, without having any expectation of respect, but at the same time offering all respects to others, right? And in that mood, kirtaniya sada hari, then one will be able to do this kirtan or sankirtan. So like that. So that is the most confidential secret of the Bhagavad Gita, which Krishna reveals. And that most confident path Krishna reveals very directly and explicitly. He has indirectly hinted in other places, but here he is very direct upfront, right? And then now Krishna is in the mood to now, he explained, he now concludes by saying in text number 67, he says, "Oh Arjuna, this confidential knowledge may never be explained to those who are not austere." So this process is not for, the surrender process is not for those who are not austere, those who are not devoted to the Lord, and especially those who are envious of Krishna should never ever hear of this. Because the moment you hear of that, it is only going to increase the poison in their heart. Why should I surrender to Krishna? I would rather defy Krishna and just go meditate on Brahman. They don't know that ultimately that Brahman is also Krishna, right? So for such envious people, this is not the process, right? That. So then, after having described this, now the final section of the Bhagavad Gita, right, where Krishna is now going to present the glories of the Bhagavad Gita. So both Krishna and later Arjuna and finally Sanjaya are going to explain the glories of Bhagavad Gita. Right. So there in text number 68, Krishna says, "For one who explains," so this is the special blessing for those who understand and explain the Bhagavad Gita. "For one who explains the supreme secret to the devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed." So devotion is guaranteed, and at the end, such a person will come back to me. And then he says, "There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear." So no one more dear than such a devotee, right? Then what about those who hear? So those who study, right? Like what we are doing here. We are going through a very systematic study of Bhagavad Gita. What do we get, right? So anyone, I declare that he who studies the sacred conversation of our worships me by his intelligence. So by studying Bhagavad Gita, right, what are we doing? We are worshipping Krishna by our intelligence. Right? This is, Krishna used the word, it is a jnana yagya, right? Then what about those who are just, may not have gone through very deep systematic study, right? But they are just listening, right? They are listening, right? With faith and without envy. So very open-minded, genuine listening. What about them? For such people says, anyone who listens with faith and without envy becomes free from sin. and attains to the auspicious planets where the pious dwell and attains higher state. Right? So like that. So then Krishna asks, oh Arjuna, have your doubts been dispelled, or do you want me to explain the whole thing again? What do you want, Arjuna? Right? Then Arjuna says in text number 73, another very, very powerful. So if we have genuinely and seriously studied Bhagavad Gita in the mood of Arjuna, this is what we should also experience. Nashtamoho smritir labdhva tat prasadan maya chuta sthitosmi gata sandeha karishye vachanam tava. Oh Arjuna, my illusion, nashta moha, my illusion is gone. Right? So all of one's illusion is gone. Smritir labdhva, regains one's composure and memory. Right? One becomes free from doubt. Right? And finally, one follows Krishna's instructions in the Bhagavad Gita. Karishye vachanam tava, I will do what you say. Yeah, like that. So then the mic shifts. Remember, the whole Bhagavad Gita was being narrated by Sanjaya to the blind king Dhritarashtra. Right? So now the camera now shifts back to the palace in Hastinapur, where now Sanjaya comes back into the scene and he says, thus I have heard this conversation of these two great souls, Krishna and Arjuna, and it is so wonderful, that message, that my hair is standing on end. Right? It is by the mercy of Vyasa I have heard these most confidential talks directly from the master of mysticism, Yogam Yogeshwarat Krishna, Sakshat Kathya Swayam, personally speaking to Arjuna. Because how is it that Sanjay is able to sit in a remote location and telepathically hear the conversation there? Because his guru, Srila Vyasadeva, has actually blessed Sanjaya, and therefore by that skill he is able to do that. And therefore he says, as I repeatedly recall this wonderful and holy dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, I take pleasure being thrilled at every moment. So don't think that once you have studied the Bhagavad Gita, you don't have to study it again. It will be a boring book. No. Sanjaya himself is saying, he is the, like how we are hearing Bhagavad Gita. Krishna and Arjuna are talking, but we are hearing Bhagavad Gita like Sanjaya. So as Sanjaya is saying, if I repeatedly recall, if I hear it again and again, I take pleasure in being thrilled at every moment. That is the power of Bhagavad Gita. These are live texts. Every time you read such text, you're going to get a deeper and more beautiful meaning. Right? That is what makes these books so alive. They are not dead books. They are life books. They are alive books. Right? And then he says, as I remember this wonderful form of Lord Krishna, I am struck with wonder more and more, and I rejoice again and again. And having said that, a very, very prophetic statement is going to come now. The last verse of the Bhagavad Gita in text number 78. Sanjaya says, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna. So where there is Krishna, who is the master mystic, Yogeshwara. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Tatra Partho Dhanurdarha, and where there is Arjuna, the expert archer. Right? Then what is guaranteed? Tatra Shri. Shri means opulence. Vijaya, victory. Bhuti, extraordinary power. And Niti, morality. They will prevail. Iti mama. This is my understanding. That's how Sanjaya. So by saying that there is opulence, morality, extraordinary power, and victory is on the side of Krishna and Arjuna. So indirectly, he's telling Dhritarashtra, even before the beginning of the war, that victory is going to be on the side of the Pandavas, on the side of Arjuna. So therefore, This is this is how the Bhagavad Gita concludes. Such a beautiful and profound message, right? And we'll very quickly summarize what we discussed today. We discussed a lot, which is the essence of the essence, as I said, right? So we began our discussion taking up from yesterday. Yesterday we discussed the section before that. We discussed about the how part, the constitution and motivation of work. Today we are discussing the what part. The what is defined by my gunas, define my swabhava. My swabhava defines what I have to do, my prescribed duties for dharma. Because by doing so, in mode of goodness of my motivation and action, I will reach a stage of perfection, my swarupa. Therefore, don't worry about success or failure in your work. Work is not meant for achieving results alone, but the deeper purpose of work is for achieving purification of the heart, right? Therefore, work in that spirit of devotion, following one's prescribed duties. So why do I do that? The purpose, the deeper purpose, that has been explained in the confidential, most confidential, more confidential parts. The confidential path is where such a person, having gone through the routines of life, following on prescribed duties, or sometimes they may be born very advanced, and they take up to the process of sannyasa, give up this world like a jnani, attain the stage of Brahman, but from there, by bhakti, they understand Krishna as an absolute truth. The more confidential path, this is a very systematic path where one is following on prescribed duties, continues to do that, does not give up under the Lord's protection. Even they don't have to go to the forest anywhere, but by the deeper vision, they are able to absorb. And at the time of, as we studied in the 8th chapter, at the time of their death, they are able to remember Krishna through meditative absorption, and they attain to Paramatma and understand that this is Krishna himself, the absolute truth. And then there is the most confidential direct path. While performing their prescribed duties, because they have completely surrendered unto Krishna, because they are not acting out of false ego, but they are working exclusively for Krishna, under the process of this loving devotion, right? They follow the path of surrender, and they directly realize Bhagavan, who is Krishna himself. And this process of surrender, we discussed, it's a progression, it's a process, but it's not a stage, as we understand here, right? The stage surrender is also there, as we discussed in the previous two parts, but in the most confidential process, we are following the process of surrender to systematically, tuning ourselves in line with the highest principle, and that is the process of sadhana bhakti. But this most confident path is not for everyone, not for those who are not austere or not devoted to Krishna or were envious of Krishna. Having said this, Krishna explains the phalastuti. What does one gain by explaining, by studying, or by listening to Bhagavad Gita? And the effect of Bhagavad Gita, we understood that nashta moha smritir labdhva, one's illusion is gone, one's memory is regained, one is free from all doubts, and one karishye vachanam tava, one follows the instruction of Bhagavad Gita. And it is not, and this opulence, victory, extraordinary power, morality is not just for Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna is personally present in our life in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. We just have to imbibe the mood of Arjuna, and then we will also attain opulence, victory, extraordinary power, and morality. All right. So with this, let's conclude our discussion of the Bhagavad Gita. So let's see if there are any quick questions or comments from anyone. Okay. Yeah. So Alok ji, would you like to ask your question?
Prabhuji, this complete surrender, practically I have been trying to do it, but there are a lot of fluctuations during this entire process. Though I perfectly have adopted this notion conceptually, but practicing and realizing it, all the movement is very difficult. Most of the times false ego, I forget this, and the false ego comes into picture. So I just want to understand practically how can we adopt this complete surrender in a day-to-day life. Is there any guidelines, is there tips through which I can do it practically?
Yes, that is the whole process of sadhana bhakti. that Rupa Goswami has given, and that is what Srila Prabhupada has given us. The whole methodology that we practice is this process of sadhana. The whole objective of the sadhana bhakti is to ultimately inculcate that mood of surrender. That is why I said, we should not be prematurely jumping into the stage of the highest surrender, but rather understand this surrender, this flavor of surrender that we are being taught or we are trying to learn in sadhana bhakti is a progressive process. First, we have to work on accepting the things which are favorable and rejecting things which are unfavorable. Without doing that, we cannot straight away go to the stage of complete, the depending exclusively on Krishna, right? So yes, so the methodology of sadhana bhakti, all the 64 angas of bhakti that Rupa Goswami talks about in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which 40 of the 64 Srila Prabhupada instituted in the morning program routine, like offering flowers to the Lord, offering lamp to the Lord, smelling the tulsi, watering tulsi, offering prayers to the Lord, circumambulating, the temple of the Lord. So there are many angas, many principles of devotional service. So all the 64 principles of devotional service are the means to systematically develop this surrender. So yeah, I will encourage you to read this book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where Sri Rupa Goswami and Sri Prabhupada has given a summary study of that in the form of Nectar of Devotion. So there we have this whole process is there. Or otherwise, if you can find devotees who are in line with these principles that we spoke about, right? So you can also get trained under them, and that is how you can adopt this process. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, would it be possible for you to also take a few sessions on the Bhakti Rasamrita
Sindhu?
Yeah.
So yeah, two of my very good dear friends, His Grace Balram Shakti Prabhu and His Grace Gaurang Darshan Prabhu, already have their courses online on this. So I will encourage you to join their courses because they are already teaching that. So as part of the Govardhan School of Yoga, our area of focus is on specific courses. So, but we encourage you to do that. We also conduct residential programs here at Govardhan Eco Village, where I live, on these courses as well. But I'll definitely encourage you to do those courses as well. Yeah.
It would be great if you can drop a link of these courses in the same group.
Yes.
It would be great.
Sure. If you are on that WhatsApp group, yes, we'll post the links to those courses. Definitely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Krishna.
Right. Hare Krishna. Yes, Gail Mataji, please.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. My
Hare
God, there's a lot. I have a lot of work for you right now. There's so much confusion for me here today. Okay, first thing, I think yesterday you were saying surrender is like the threshold, the doorway to bhakti. I think you said. But anyway, what is the distinction between surrender and bhakti, having bhakti?
Okay. So specifically in this tradition, now, sometimes they are used synonymously, right? But the epitome of that bhakti manifests in that mood of complete exclusive surrender to the Lord. Now the word bhakti there's a whole spectrum involved in it. Like for example, even in the more confidential path, one is still exhibiting bhakti. Sometimes it could be tinged with certain jnana or karma or dhyana, right? Or yoga mishra bhakti, jnana mishra bhakti. They can be tinged with certain. That is also kind of bhakti. But when you talk about this exclusive devotion, right? So that exclusive devotion is symbolized by this mood of surrender. So if you say bhakti, is that kind of an internal state, it manifests in the form of that acts of surrender. Like
yeah,
that.
But you're using the same word to define what I need defined.
Yes. That's why I said, they many times you'll see them being used equivocally, right? So if you see the word bhakti in itself, Srila Prabhupada always translates as devotional service, right? But there is a certain there's a certain mood, there's a certain flavor exclusively to the Gaudiya Vaishnava understanding, to that bhakti. And that mood and that flavor is that of exclusive dependence on Krishna, not on anything else. Right? Anyabhilashta shunyam, jnana karmadi anavritam. Right? It is not that there's no jnana and karma, but we don't let them overshadow bhakti. So that mood where you are keeping that, ultimately all the angas of, for example, we spoke about Swadharma, we spoke about Varnashram Dharma, we spoke about so many other Vedic processes. But when you're talking about the surrender process, the internal mood of the practitioner is that externally, though I'm following my prescribed duty, I am doing it for the pleasure of Krishna, because I'm trying to connect to Krishna, I'm trying to depend on Krishna. So that is that mood. So when we are talking about that Shuddha Bhakti, pure devotion, right? So that Shuddha Bhakti is what that has been synonymously used with this word surrender, right? So that is why you are seeing that overlap happening here. So throughout the Bhagavad Gita, when we spoke about bhakti, there has been different flavors to it. But here, when we are using this word of exclusive devotion, we are talking about this specific mood of complete surrender, according to this whole spectrum of 6 levels that we spoke about.
Okay, because I'm just trying to get away from the word surrender to define surrender. So surrender, would you say, is synonymous with, as you said, complete dependence, or a sense of I am exclusively the property, or I am the property of Krishna exclusively. He can do with me whatever he wants, like that.
That is the epitome of surrender. But as we discussed, that surrender also has a spectrum, right? It begins with first accepting the favorable and rejecting the unfavorable. That is the first step. Like, as a practical example, if following my Varnashram Dharma is favorable for bhakti, then I will follow it. Sometimes, in an extreme scenario, if it is not favorable, then I will reject it. That was the mood of the residents of Vrindavan, right? So we are even such a exclusivity. The one who's following this path of exclusive devotion also does things externally like any other spiritualist, but they are doing it only because they see that this is favorable for Krishna, favorable for developing my relationship with Krishna, but for no other reason. Like, for example, fasting. Many people in India fast on Ekadashi, but the Vaishnavas, they fast on Ekadashi because they know this is Madhava Tithi. It is a very, very special day, and fasting on this particular day helps one develop that connection to Krishna. It enhances, it leads to development of that prema towards Krishna eventually. So that is the reason why I'm fasting. I'm not fasting to lose weight. I'm not fasting to test my strength of how much I can stay away from food, to test my sense control. I'm fasting for the pleasure of Krishna. So you see, fasting done by many people, but here, when you follow this mood of surrender, accepting it favorable because it is helping me come closer to Krishna. So you see the subtle difference in the mood here.
Oh yeah, that I have understood, but just anyway, it might be a process trying to really understand the distinction between these two words, surrender and bhakti. That might be a process itself. I don't know.
Right.
Okay. Another question is, when we view surrender as a stage instead of a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you mind if we go to page 2, please?
Yeah.
That's right. Because actually there was a word you wrote there I didn't understand. Right? If you go to the for me it's the right side of the page. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Before I ask my question, there's a word that you wrote here that I couldn't make out. Okay. You see the leftmost let's say, confidential knowledge side, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Above prescribed duties. No. On the, go more to your. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So above prescribed duties, then that word is what?
This
Begins
is
with a P?
purification.
Oh, purification.
Yes.
Okay. So these this path here is confidential knowledge. The middle one is more confidential, right?
Yes.
And the last is most confidential. So
yes.
in the confidential, we have a person performs prescribed duty, becomes purified, and that leads to higher understanding.
And through that, yes, and one takes up to this process of sannyasa and attains the process like a typical what a jnani does, attains the state of Brahman, but understands that Brahman is just the effulgence of Krishna and develops that bhakti, that is Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma, na shochati na kankshati. Samha sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakti labhate param. So such, even from the Brahma Bhuta stage, one attains the process of bhakti and finally has to connect to Krishna. Brahman in itself is not the final destination. Beyond that Brahman lies Bhagavan or Krishna.
Yes. Okay. So, and now I want to distinguish that one from the more confidential, where after prescribed duties,
yes,
of course, there must be purification there too.
Yeah,
but
there is still purification, but one does not give up one's work and take sannyas. Remember, we began this chapter by talking about sannyasi and a tyagi.
Yes.
So the more confidential path, the confidential path you can say is a path of the sannyasi, but the more confidential path you can say is like a path of a tyagi, where one is just working under the protection of the Lord, freeing oneself from the attachment to work. And gradually one comes to that stage where one realizes the Paramatma without having to even go to the forest, without even having to take sannyas, without doing any intense spiritual, just as a course of their, their buddhi yoga activities, right? By engaging in this world, by the detached engagement that they have with this world, they will realize the Lord as Paramatma who is seated within their heart, and from there attend to, from Paramatma understanding, elevate to Krishna or Bhagavan understanding.
Okay, so since this person, he's working under the Lord's protection because his activities are for the Lord's pleasure, isn't it?
So there is a very, good. There is a very, very subtle difference here, right? Here, like even in Buddhi Yoga, if you notice, our definition of Buddhi Yoga evolved by the time it came to the 10th chapter, right? So in Buddhi Yoga, we are separating karma, jnana, and bhakti as three separate things. Whereas in the process of surrender, if you remember, we discussed karma becomes seva to the Lord, jnana becomes swadhyay about the Lord, and bhakti is our sadhana towards the Lord, right? We discussed that aspect also. When we defined Buddhi Yoga in chapter number 2, we said that a deeper meaning of that Buddhi Yoga, right, is where even karma now is done about those things which are favorable for the service of the Lord. That is seva.
Yes.
I'm not interested in any other ordinary jnana. I'm interested in jnana about the Lord. That is swadhyaya. Yes. And I don't want to do bhakti. My whole intention is absorbing my mind in the Lord. That is my sadhana. So like that. So there's a very, very subtle difference between in the year when he's working under Lord's protection. Still, there is an expectation of Lord protecting me from my sins. It's a very, very subtle aspect there. But whereas in the process of this exclusive devotion, one is not even interested, my Lord, like as we see in the Shikshashtakam prayers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says, Mama Janmani Janmani Ishware. I don't even care for liberation, my Lord. I don't even care for any worldly opulence, nothing. I only want to be your unalloyed devotee life after life. So one is not even interested in freedom from sins or liberation or moksha, nothing like that. One is only interested in exclusive devotion. Like,
Okay. Okay. Okay, Prabhu. And then, okay, and
so just little addition to that. That is the reason why, if you read some of our Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharya's commentaries, especially Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they are very, very particular about what is that surrender and exclusive devotion and what is ordinary bhakti. So there are some subtle differences they talk about. Pradhani bhukta bhakti, guna bhuta bhakti, but we don't want to complicate our understanding at this stage. But if you read the commentaries of Vishwanath Thakur, they are very, very clear about this is exclusive pure devotion. Even though this may sound like bhakti or this may sound like surrender, but is not surrender. This is a different form or a lesser form of bhakti. So they like to very categorically talk about that. But as we discussed earlier also in one of our sessions, Srila Prabhupada has been very kind to us. He in every purport he has connected how even this verse can be understood from the point of view of exclusive devotion. So that is the extra point. Yeah.
You had referred to this chart here when you were discussing surrender as a stage. So at which part of this chart is the stage of surrender?
Okay. So when going through your prescribed duties, coming to karma, to jnana, to dhyana, finally at this stage, let's actually write that down. So at this stage, when we spoke about this bhakti, this is where such a Brahmavadi Jnani or a Paramatma realized yogi, they completely surrender. They come to that stage of surrender and then they realize Krishna.
Okay.
Whereas the process of surrender is the last line, that the last path that you see here. Right?
Yeah.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the more confidential for the confidential, the more confidential is after Brahman realization and then after Paramatma realization.
Yes. Yes. That is why sometimes Prabhupada, he would mention that bhakti is beyond liberation.
Yeah.
Because by the time you reach Brahman realization or Paramatma realization, you're already liberated. Bhakti begins beyond that.
Okay, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Another big question for me was this, when you were saying that, regardless of what our swabhav is, our nature is, we can, how should I say? Okay, let me just see.
Irrespective of our swabhava, I said, irrespective of our gunas, if we can work on our motivation and constitution, we can still attain perfection. Yes.
Yes. Now, my question was, to me, one's constitution. Yeah, I realized yesterday you broke constitution down as one's work, the instruments of work, and the doer of work, right?
Yes.
So I don't know how to distinguish between that and one's swabhav. They sound the same. One's constitution is their nature, no? Their psychophysical nature.
No, when you're actually engaging your nature into an action, how is that work? How is it that you're performing that work? How are you using your determination there? So that is what we define as constitution. So
yeah, the lines are blurred for me between one. I have a nature,
all right,
and because of that nature, I'm doing a particular activity,
right.
So I don't know where one begins and the other ends.
Okay.
Constitution and swabhav.
So imagine now I'm a Shudra who's in the mode of, or my the swabhava of Shudra nature has come because of certain tamogun of the past.
Okay. Yeah.
And right now my prescribed duty is I have to work under the guidance of someone and render service. But when I'm rendering service, right, I should be rendering that service as a work, as a doer of that work. My mood should be a sense of duty, and then be determined about whatever work I'm doing. And that work itself should be dispassionate by nature. And I need to remain steady in my work, right? I've been given a work of, say, carrying flowers of the Lord from one place to another. So in that activity, I'm going to use all of this. My work, I'm going to do it in dispassionate way, meaning I'm not going to take those flowers and start smelling. I'm going to steal one flower and put it for myself, right? I'm going to do it because I've been told to do it. That sense of duty and determination and enthusiastically executing that comes in. And there should be steadiness and consistency in my duty. I need to turn up every day at this time. This is the time when the seva of the Lord begins and the flower seva begins. Therefore, I have to report there on time. That is the steadiness I'm showing in my determination.
It sounds like you're coming into motivation with this part of your talk here.
Okay. So then the motivation becomes, right? So remember that knowledge, having that kind of an inclusive vision and very clear understanding, right? So the inclusive vision would be that understanding that, such a person sees, oh, everybody is ultimately a spirit soul and they are all connected to the Lord. Therefore, what service who is doing really doesn't matter. And therefore, that clarity comes in the understanding of such a person. And even though, ultimately the goal of happiness, even though initially there will be some hardship, I have to carry that load of flowers, that whole sack of flowers on my back, I have to carry it, I have to go through such particular activity, right? But then ultimately understand, after putting in that hard work, eventually I'll experience that bliss when I see, oh, all those flowers which I personally carried are now decorating the beautiful form of the Lord, and that sight is going to give me great bliss. So initially I went through poison, but now I'm experiencing the nectar.
Okay, so as a Sudra, this is the kind of work that you're made for, basically, right?
Yes.
So that's your swabhav, right?
Yes.
Now that swabhav is being expressed, let's say, in the form of carrying flowers.
Yes.
Okay, so you said that we can engage. Okay, when we're surrendering, we engage our swabhav. In what we can change is our constitution, how we engage that.
Yes, you got it right. The how part is something that we need to channelize it into mode of goodness. Many times the mistake that we make is, oh, Brahmana's activity is Brahmana is in mode of goodness. I should be in mode of goodness. Let me give up my swabhava and start imitating a Brahmana.
Yes.
That is not the right approach. We need to change those internal acts. The motivation and constitution of work is what we need to change, not the work itself.
But yet we are supposed to, even if we have Shudra nature, we are supposed to be trying to develop these Brahminical qualities also, isn't it? So that seems like a little blurry right there.
So again, when you use the word Brahminical qualities, we are coming to quality. Where are the qualities in terms of our motivation and our constitution of work? We are not changing just because, like for example, this is the understanding of Daivi Varna. This also in one of our previous discussions, that how the action in itself does not matter. Somebody could be managing the sewage pipeline, somebody could be managing the deity worship, right? But according to their own talents and natures, they may be doing different activities which in themselves may be associated with certain gunas, but those gunas are not going to affect that person because the person themselves have developed a certain mode of goodness in their training. That is what we're talking about when we say Brahminical training, it is not that everybody has to now from today start, abandon all services and everybody should become pujaris in a temple. Even in ordinary temple, you'll see there are so many services that are needed, right? So everyone, according to their nature, acts in a Brahminical way, means in mode of goodness. So this is I can relate where your question is coming from, because sometimes this narrative has been very confusingly presented. When we talk about Brahminic, in fact, if I may say, there is only one standard, it is called Brahminical standard. That is a mode of goodness standard. And we all have to aspire to come to that mode of goodness standard internally. But externally, it is easier for us to act according to what my past, constitution, what my past has, swabhava, it has been created. And better I just engage according to that prescribed duty. And eventually, over a period of time, swabhava also goes through some transformations, right? So that is sometimes very natural to see, right? But at the initial stage, we are not here to prematurely change our swabhava. Just because that activity is good, that is Brahminical, that is good. That is why Krishna uses that verse where he says, every activity has some fault, just like how fire is covered with smoke. So it is not about changing your action, it is changing about your internals, the motivation and the constitution of work.
So when we say that a person is in a particular mode, right? Like, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmana, whatever, we are referring to their external activities,
their nature, which is defining their external activity. So when you use the word nature, many times you may think it is a psychophysical conditioning. So think of nature to be the deposit coming from the past.
Yes.
Motivation and constitution is the choice you are making in the present. Right? How I am able to channelize this nature in service of the Lord is defined by the choices I'm making in the present. So that intention, that choice, that motivation, constitution is what we are trying to work on. That is why we called it as the how part, not the what part. Right?
Yes.
Otherwise, such narrative can be very damaging to the society. If everybody wants to only become a Brahmana, in fact, that false narrative has been the cause of destruction of the Vedic society, where prematurely Kshatriyas and Vaishyas gave up their dharma and said, we also want to become Brahmanas. So that's when what Buddhism has done to Indian culture. So many kings and the Vaishyas, they gave up their dharma. When Vaishya gives up his dharma, the entire economy collapses. When the king gives up his dharma, the borders become weak. And that was the time when invaders came into India, and that has, has created such a deep damage to the Vedic culture. So these are very damaging narratives. So we should not, even think or encourage such narratives. So Krishna is not talking about changing your action, but changing your approach towards it.
So it is a person's, let's say, I guess it has to be then a person's motivation behind their work that determines what mode they are actually in, no?
What mode they are actually in right now while doing that work. But we also carry with us a baggage from the past.
Okay, let's take the flower carrying example, right?
Okay.
So that person is a Shudra from their past. This is the work that they're qualified for, right?
Yes.
So, but they're doing that carrying of the flowers for Krishna. So therefore,
that is spiritual.
Yes. I mean, actually transcendental, but so that person, even though he has a Shudra nature, right? And he's doing beyond ordinary mode of goodness work. He's doing transcendental
goodness. Yes.
But so this person is, would you say that he is in the, because he's a Shudra, so would you say he's in the mode of ignorance, or he's, beyond the modes? Which one?
So this is a good question. Srila Prabhupada was once asked that, how many pure devotees are there in this world? And the reporter was expecting for Prabhupada to say just one, right? But Prabhupada just looked at his disciples saying, okay, how many devotees are there in ISKCON? So some X number. So says, so many number of pure devotees are there in this world. And this completely bewildered all his disciples. Prabhupada, we are pure devotees, right? So then he says, no, actually, because you are following this process of pure devotional service, right? Because you are acting for the pleasure of Krishna, indirectly we are at that level of acting beyond the modes. We are not letting the modes direct us. We are letting the instruction of Guru and Shastra direct us. Therefore, even though we may not know, we are actually acting at a level beyond the modes. But the moment we realize it, that is when we will attain fully that state of pure goodness, like that. So yes, bhakti, when you say is beyond the modes, even at the level of sadhana bhakti, we are actually acting in a way that is beyond the modes. But the practitioner is still influenced by certain modes. Therefore, it is best for that practitioner. So there's a practitioner and the actions of that practitioner. This we need to delineate.
Yeah, and this is what I'm asking. When we say that a person is in a particular mode, oh, I see that person, he's in the mode of passion, right? Are we talking, when we say that, are we talking about his activities, or are we talking about his swabhava?
We're talking about the swabhava of that person. Just because a king, just because a kshatriya sometimes has to show some passion, it is not that these rajarshis ever showed passion. Their activity, their nature was a kshatriya nature, but they acted in a way that by which they exhibited mode of goodness even in their action. That is why the determination to stick in terms of whether failure or success in a battlefield, never running away from the battlefield. So these are all qualities of the higher gunas, like that.
Okay, so therefore a person may have a swabhava of one nature, but he may do so many activities that are of so many different modes.
Can you repeat that?
A person may have a swabhava that's predominantly in one mode.
Right.
But he can perform various activities that exhibit various modes.
By performing various activities, so which means, yes, his motivation and constitution can be wavered, according to the sattva, rajas and tamas. Yes. So that is a choice that we need to make. So that is how, while still acting in this world, apparently under the influence of gunas, we will learn to channelize those gunas and transcend those gunas.
Okay, Prabhu.
All right.
Last question. Yes.
Should we just take a couple of other questions, because I'm noticing there are some questions that are mentioned in the chat box as well. So let's quickly read those. So there's a message. I think very similar to what we discussed. Varna of a person does not depend on the birth, but on the skill or activities one performs, right? Then is it that a person can go from being classified from one varna to another over a lifetime? So it is possible sometimes that so varna basically not depend on birth, but chatur varna maya shishtam guna karma swabhavaja. So based on the gunas, the modes of material nature, their actions and their swabhavas. It is sometimes possible that over a period of time, one's swabhava can go through a slight change, but predominantly it remains the same. That has been the general understanding presented, right? So it is not that suddenly a kshatriya will suddenly one day become a brahmana. That in fact few people have done that, but that is those are emergencies or those are extraordinary situations. But predominantly it remains the same. like that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So anybody else wants to ask a question? I know this is the last session today, therefore I'm extending beyond our time. So anybody
Prabhuji,
else would like to ask a question?
Prabhuji, just a small question. So, as I understand, the Varna would not, Varna is basically based on the karma, what are karma we perform. But I have observed that these karma could be amalgamation of two or three no, Varna's nature also. Like in the mode of knowledge, the Brahmane and the Kshatri qualities could be amalgamated. A person could have a Brahmanical nature also, and a Kshatri nature also. So there's no clear-cut segregation of these varnas. What I observed, like if I take my example, I was early in the military, and then I changed the and moved to corporate, but I'm now a banker. So, but
Right.
initially I was into the fighting, commando and all, then and perfectly a banker. So, if you go by your notion, there would be always be amalgamation of different varnas also. How can we treat that?
Yeah, actually the reason why we observe that is in Kali Yuga, we don't follow the Varnashram Dharma properly. Like from the moment of conception to when the child is born, certain samskaras need to be given, certain training needs to be given. In fact, what is happening is because of lot of external influences, distortion in our education, distortions because of our influence of people around us, we end up developing this. You used a very nice, polite word called as amalgamation, but I like to use the word mutation. There's mutation of our swabhava happening. Therefore, it becomes so complicated for many people to actually identify their swabhava and then act according to that. Therefore, actually, I find greater solace in this more confidential path where, because understand that every swabhava, every activity has some fault or the other. Try to dovetail whatever state we are in, whatever activity, whatever guna that we are in the service of the Lord. And that way you will see, ultimately our goal is in purification of the heart. Right? So if you want to stick to that, the more classical way, then a lot of things need to be done even before the birth of the child itself. So that's where things get little complicated. That's why we see so many mutations or hybrids or amalgamations that, as you mentioned today, right? Okay. All right. So there is, okay, Gail ji has typed a question in the chat box, and we'll end with this question. This knowledge is not for those who are not austere, right? But who's austere in Kali Yuga? What is meant by austere? So in Kali Yuga, the greatest austerity for us is to at least be willing to willingly be open to follow the instructions of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Right? That we can say, at least if you're open-minded to this whole learning process, that itself is the greatest tapa. Because tapasya, it helps in facilitating our learning process. Then swadhyaya, once you start learning, then begins the deep introspective study. Swadhyaya leads to understanding of oneself, like that. So this is so tapa, austerity, you can say, is willing to learn itself is a big austerity. Okay.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you.
This has been amazing sessions. Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us for this wonderful journey. And this is just the beginning for all of us in our study of the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita study is a lifelong study. Month after month, if not year after year, please do study the Bhagavad Gita in your own capacity. Right? This is what we did in this course. Is an overview just to inspire everyone to go into a deeper study. So please do read, especially Srila Prabhupada. The Bhaktivedanta purports are such amazing source of this wisdom. So we do request all of you to please read more in detail, and please do share and encourage more people to study the Bhagavad Gita. All right. So thank you all so much. So we'll end now with our concluding prayers. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunattu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much for joining us. And in the last session, we are going to see a very quick overview of the entire Bhagavad Gita, all the 18 chapters on just one slide. All right. So see you tomorrow. Hare Krishna.